Hereby call the open part of the Planning and Community Affairs Committee to order. I'd like to ask everyone to please rise for a moment of silence. Please be seated. So item 5 on the agenda is to deal with matters from the closed session held earlier today. All of council should have a copy of a motion put forward by Councillor Watton. I'll just read it for the benefit of the audience and the press. That management and non-union staff salary grid as shown in attachment 3 of report CONF 2017-14 be approved and be effective January 1st, 2018, and that the annual salary grid increases identified in attachment 3 of report CONF 2017-14 for management and non-union staff be conditional upon a successful performance appraisal and an increase in tax revenue related to assessment growth and or efficiencies and savings identified through the operating budget process. Any questions on that motion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor? Carried. Next item is the disclosure of pecuniary interest for the open session and nature thereof. Seeing none. Next item, announcements from council and then staff. Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was delighted to be at the Mississauga First Nations charity on Wednesday morning, where they gave away $331,000, which was so impressive. It ranged anywhere from $2,000 to $2,500 to $5,000 to $10,000 to $100,000. So it was just a joy to see how much is given to charities and who help people who are so much in need. And one thing that just struck me really hard was, and my CIO friend who was sitting next to me, he felt the same way, was the St. Vincent de Paul dinner, and where they serve 150 people a day, 365 days a year. It just blew me out of the water. I just go, my God, we have a lot of people in this area that are really in desperate situation. But 331,000 went out to help these agencies, and Operation Scugog and Durham North and food banks and charities of all kinds, where they take gifts to the nursing home, just things like that just warmed your heart so much to see this happening in our community. So thank you so much to the First Nations for giving us that amount of money.
Yes, and I would echo that. We're very fortunate to be able to witness and be part of that. A great relationship with the Mississauga Scugog Island First Nation, and they changed the name from Bagwatting Association to the Mississauga's Grant Committee, is it? Somewhere along those lines. But it's so fantastic that they're continuing on with those initiatives even after the OLG has taken over operations of the casino. So we're very fortunate. And also what you're alluding to about all the organizations that are so philanthropic and charity and giving to those less fortunate, it does really open up your eyes to the things that really matter in life and in the township and the region. So I echo your comments, and we're very fortunate. Councillor Kett.
Thank you, Mayor. On the same note, the Scugog Island Hall got $2,500, and the Scugog Island United Church got $2,500. So that was a great day for the island. It just gets better.
Any other announcements from council? Councillor Drew?
Thank you. The clerk just informed me that the Durham Region website went live today. There's a bit of a celebration and launch on Wednesday morning, but it did go live today, so it's something that we've been working on for quite some time. The other thing I would like to say, I got some, I'm looking for it right now, but a media report today, and I was very disturbed with the results of the RIDE program. There was actually they report every week on the results of the number of stops they make and the number of breathalyzer tests that they do. And this past week, even though there were less stops than there were last year, there were more charges. And it really disturbs me that people are not getting the message. Please don't drink and drive.
Any other announcements from council? Councillor Somerville?
I could have added this in with my other one. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We were also entertained on Thursday evening for our thank you to our service volunteers who help out so much with all of the committees that we have from council. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. Get so excited about all these things. There was, I'm not sure how many there was there, but the arena was filled, community center was filled, and we had great entertainment and fabulous food. So thank you to Lisa and to the senior staff for putting that together, and we had a wonderful evening. Thank you.
I was going to mention that too if it wasn't brought up, but the volunteer recognition dinner, that's really the small gesture that the township give, but other than that, they work tirelessly, those committee members, all year long, for just as volunteering to help make our municipality better. So it was well attended and well represented, and I think that we're very fortunate in Scugog Township to have so many volunteers that are willing to give the most valuable gift of time, and without any expectation of monetary in return, except for a dinner at the end of the year, which I think is so little for what so much that we get in return. So I do want to also echo the appreciation to staff and all those involved with setting that up, and I know Lisa and Lindsay and other members of staff are there, Sandra, etc., setting up that hall and organizing, sending out invitations. So it's much appreciated that all the work that goes on behind the scenes. So thanks again. Any other announcements from council? All right. Announcements from staff? Chief Bernie?
Thank you, Mayor Road. I have 3 brief ones, please. Just like to inform council and in the community that we have received our new tanker fire truck, 2,500 gallon tanker truck that should have a significant impact to our fire protection services in the rural area. Thank you very much. Also, our Fill the Fire Truck campaign is ongoing. We're just about ready to deliver our first load of unwrapped toys, which is awesome. And again, I'd like to thank the community for the generosity. Operation Scugog benefits from it, and it's really nice to see. And the last one comes with an invitation to council, and that is for this Wednesday night in our recruit graduation, starting at 6 p.m. If council is able, we'd love to have you there. Right here in Port Perry at Station 61. Thank you.
Any other announcements from staff? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the adoption of the minutes. I have moved by Councillor Somerville that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning and Community Affairs held Monday, November 20, 2017 be approved. Any questions, errors, omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Next up, we're at the public meetings portion of our agenda, item 9.1. So this time I'll ask, sorry, I was trying to pronounce your last name in my head, and I was going to mess it up. Robert Bertoli? Bertoli, yeah. I was trying not to butcher it, but how do you pronounce it?
Got it.
And I didn't have it here in front of me, so I was just going off of memory, so I just... So just before you proceed with the report, this portion of the meeting has been set aside for 2 statutory public information meetings being held under Section 34 of the Planning Act for zoning bylaw amendment application Z08-2017, submitted by Michael Fowler and Associates on behalf of John Vanderzalm for property located at 1431 Highway 7A and application Z09-2017 submitted by Clark Consulting Services on behalf of Glenn Carey for property located at 151 Scugog Line 6. It is important that the public express their views, either in person or in writing, prior to decisions being made by this council. If you wish to file an appeal of council's decision to the Ontario Municipal Board on either of these files, you must first speak to the matter at this public meeting or provide a written submission before a zoning bylaw amendment is passed. If you don't, you will not be added to as party to a hearing by the OMB unless the board determines there are reasonable grounds to do so. Public notice was served by the Township of Scugog in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. Mr. Rob Bertoli, please proceed with your presentation at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, we're here to discuss the zoning bylaw amendment, application Z08-2017. This is for the 1431 Highway 7A. This is a statutory public information meeting where the public is provided the opportunity to comment on the proposal. As you're aware, no decisions are made at this time, but the feedback received will inform staff recommendation report back to council. The required public notice was provided to all property owners within 400 feet of the subject property and posted on the township's website, as well as a sign was also placed on the property to notify the public of the application. A report was provided to council last week for review, but I will just touch on some of the highlights here. The applicant owns the greenhouse nursery located on a portion of the subject lands of 1431 Highway 7A. An application for consent, Land Division 046-2016, between this property and the adjoining neighboring parcel of 1395 Highway 7A was granted conditional approval in February of 2017 by the region. The conditions for this approval was that both parcels conform to the provisions of our zoning bylaw. The applicant is now attempting to fulfill these conditions by rezoning the property to allow the existing legal non-conforming second dwelling as a permitted use on the consolidated parcel, as well as reduce the required rear yard setback from 15 meters to 12.5 meters. Please note the existing secondary dwelling will be used by the applicant's daughter, who works full-time for the aforementioned nursery. So just to break this down, the applicant pursued a lot line adjustment with the neighboring parcel. This neighboring parcel contained both a primary residence as well as a secondary residence, both in detached structures, which is currently not allowed under the zoning bylaw 1414. The rezoning is required to allow the secondary dwelling, which through the lot line adjustment is now part of the applicant's land. So both properties will still maintain the single-family dwelling unit, and are simply transferring ownership of the existing secondary dwelling unit. The location of the secondary dwelling unit is itself not changing or moving, simply the lot lines around it, and the relief is required to reduce the required rear yard setback, once again due to these changing lot lines. As mentioned, the lot line adjustment was conditionally approved by the region in principle. The application was circulated to external agencies as well as internal departments, but no objections or concerns were noted. Any comments received tonight or subsequent written comments will be considered by staff in the future in regards to a recommendation report back to council's consideration. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. Is there any questions from council at this time for Mr. Bertoli? Councillor Kett?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Good presentation as always.
Oh, thanks.
Am I to assume right now that these are two different lots, or there's actually one lot?
So it's two properties. The Purple Hatch property is simply getting larger. It is retaining the Red Hatch property that is from the retained lands.
With the rehash, the Red Hash, to rehash it, it's the Red Hash.
Yeah.
Is landlocked?
No, so that's going to be part of the Purple property, the applicant's land. So right now, I guess in its current configuration, the Purple property is separate, and the Red property is part of the larger parcel that surrounds it.
Okay.
So it's just the Purple property is just gaining the Red part.
And that's the bungalow behind it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I know the property, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions from council? Okay. Seeing none, Just looking in the audience, is Michael Fowler here on behalf of the client, so do we have anybody representing to add for the client? Yeah. I just wanted to know if there was, for representing the client, if there are any questions for, or anything to add to the report that was done by staff? No? No? Okay, so then any final questions from, or any other questions from council? So we'll now open this up to members of the public who wish to speak to the application. If you'd please proceed to the microphone that's set at the podium there and state your name and municipal address for the record. So if there's anybody that wishes to speak to the application, please proceed. Right. Second call, third call. All right, if seeing nobody's from the public is wishing to speak to the application, if there's anybody here that, as mentioned earlier in there, wants to submit written submission, they do so by handing it to the clerk, making sure that their name and their municipal address is on the correspondence. Now, at this time, I'm just looking if there are any final questions from council. Okay, seeing none. So at this portion for this particular public meeting, I'd like to thank the audience for anybody who's attending for it and providing input in statutory public information meeting, and it concludes this particular statutory public information meeting. We'll now proceed on to the next one, which is going to be Ms. Knutson. Thanks, Mr. Vertoli. So just to make sure that the first introduction of the public meeting talked about both of them, but I'll just reread a portion of it just to make sure that anybody who is here attending for the second public meeting is aware that the portion of this meeting has been set aside under Section 34 of the Planning Act for zoning bylaw amendment Z09-2017, submitted by Clark Consulting Service on behalf of Glen Carey for property located at 151 Scugog Line 6. It is important for the public to express their views either in person or in writing prior to decisions being made by this council. If you wish to file an appeal of council's decision on to the Ontario Municipal Board on on this particular file, you must first speak to the matter at this public meeting or provide a written submission before a zoning bylaw amendment is passed. If you don't, then you will not be added as party to a hearing by the OMB unless the board determines there are reasonable grounds to do so. Public notice was served by the Township of Scugog in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. Ms. Knutson, could you please proceed with your presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of Council, the purpose of this report is to present preliminary information with respect to the proposed amendments for this statutory public meeting. The required public notice was provided to all property owners within 120 meters or 400 feet of the subject property, posted on the Township's website, and a sign was also placed on the property to notify the general public of the application. Glen Carey is the owner of 2 farm parcels in his own name and in joint ownership with family members totaling 77.9 hectares, which works out to be about 192.5 acres. That's in the Township of Scugog. He also leases an additional 4 agricultural parcels as part of the family farming operation. On August 14th, the Region of Durham Land Division Committee granted provisional consent to sever a dwelling deemed surplus as a result of a farm consolidation. The farm parcel will be retained and consolidated with the agricultural parcel to the west, adding to the agricultural holdings of the Carey family. Subject lands presently contain a dwelling that is not required by the farm operation or any of its employees. This rezoning application is required as a result of the conditions of consent imposed by the Land Division Committee that both the severed and retained parcels each conform with the provisions of the bylaw. Subject lands are located within South Part Lot 2, Concession 6 on the north side of Scugog Line 6, just east of Lake Ridge Road. The severed parcel at 151 Scugog Line 6 is around 1 acre in size, and the retained lands is approximately 98 acres, which will be added to the farm parcel to the east at 85 Scugog Line 6. Surrounding land uses include agricultural and rural residential and an abundance of woodlands. Staff were advised late last week that Mr. Carey wishes to keep the large metal shed that is located just above the severed lot in about this area. If you can see my cursor, it's not very bright there. And that means a further exception zone would have to be applied on the retained lands to make sure that the metal shed is never used as a barn for the housing of animals. That is with respect to the requirements of the MDS separation requirements for the Ministry of Ag and Food. It is staff's opinion that the proposal conforms or complies with all provincial planning policies, as well as the regional and Scugog official plans. Application was circulated to external agency and internal departments, and no objections or concerns were noted. Any comments received tonight or subsequent written comments will be considered by staff in a future recommendation report for council's consideration. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Knudsen. Are there any questions from council? See no questions from council. Just look to the audience for Mr. Hugh Stewart. If you're in attendance, do you have anything to add on behalf of your client? Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from council? Councilor Somerville?
Just one quick question. The property to the west of this property is owned by Glenn Carey and his family, and I know that the new piece that's being severed off, or has severed the house off, that is going to go into the name of Glenn Carey and family?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Somerville, do you mean the small parcel or the balance of the farm?
The balance of the farm.
The balance of the farm will be melded with the other farm parcel.
And will be in the same people's names?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. What was my other question? I think that was it. Thank you.
Any other questions, council? All right, at this time, are there any members of the public who wish to speak to the application? If so, please proceed to the microphone and state your name and municipal address for the record. Second call, third and final call. Or is there any, are there any further questions from council? All right, at this time, thank you very much, Knudsen. Thank you for attending and providing input to statutory public information meeting. This concludes the statutory public information meeting at this time. Now, for members of council, reports 12.1 and 12.2 deal with these two issues, so I'd like to bring forward them separately, but right now, 12.1, moved by Councilor Somerville, the recommended motion in there, which has in your agenda that the information report be received and staff report back to council with recommendation on this application at the PNC PCA meeting held the first quarter of 2018. Any questions on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Same for report 12.2, moved by Councilor Somerville, the recommended motion that the information report be received and staff report back during the first quarter of 2018. Any questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Mr. Vitoli can go home now. Now, the next question is, the next item we have on the agenda is item 10, which is presentations by Mr. John Hack, Director, Sierra Planning and Management for Parks and Recreation, and the Culture and Strategic Master Plan update. Welcome back, Mr. Hack. Just to make sure you push the button on the base of the mic so that it picks you up. You don't have to speak too closely into it. It should pick it up fine.
Should I start or? Okay, good evening, Your Worship, members of council, members of staff and any public. We're very happy to be here tonight and to give you an update to the work of the Parks, Recreation and Culture Strategic Master Planning exercise. I think an update is long overdue. We came before you here in council in, I think it was late April, and then we have had touch points with members of council and staff and the public over the course of the summer and into the fall, and we're now at the point where it's important that we come back with our ideas based on everything that we've heard, and based on our experience, and to provide some choices. So tonight is about bringing you up to speed with the kind of analysis that's been done, and the presentation is a little heavy, so I'm going to try to avoid getting sucked into that information. It is in the presentation. I'll be happy to field questions on any of the specifics, so I'll try and keep it flowing. But it's a point now where I think Council needs to see this, and then we are planning to go to the public to really pose some questions about choices and preferences based on everything we've heard, including public feedback, and that will occur on January the 17th in the new year. So in terms of the process that's been undertaken, so it started in April. We produced a very comprehensive background report called the interim report in September, and that is really the basis for any planning, in that we need to bring all of the information that we have up to a certain level, and from that some clarity exists in terms of the kinds of choices that can be made, so that this plan has some firm foundation. So that was an essential piece. It's based on a range of things. You may not recall, but in April when we did come before you, we said that we create plans which are evidence-based. So we want to understand how facilities are being used by people, what their preferences are, what the condition is, what the fiscal equation is for providing services and facilities, what trends are, and so forth, and then we go forward and plan. So we're now at the point, in terms of late November, our options for recommendations were there. Today is the council update. We want to then, with that, then continue to draft our report so we don't lose time. That report will take it to a point at which it will not be complete or done and dusted. It's very important that we get public input, and that happens January the 17th. Once that has happened, and we take on board the information coming out of that session, we'll then move forward to then finalize for staff review and council approval. So a little bit an elongated process, but I think it's very important given some of the decisions that have to be made in this. In terms of the consultation that we have, it's there on the side. We had over 300 responses to the public survey, which is an excellent response rate. We're able to make a lot of use of that information, and you'll see that in the report as it comes forward. In terms of the vision and goals, the vision, I think, will again be subject to public scrutiny. We're not here to tell you what your vision should be. We're here to put some words in front of you and allow you to mull it over as we develop the plan. But in short, investment for facilities and services to meet the needs of all residents in all communities. And that really means that we have to recognize that Scugog is a large municipality, in that you have a number of hamlets. You have obviously a main market town, regional centre in Port Perry. We have to plan for all of it, so we want to make sure that we have some fairly strident recommendations about maintaining a level of service in the hamlets as well as Port Perry. And also, and there was a previous plan that was done a decade ago, and I think we've arrived at the same conclusion, is that in addition to Port Perry, we need to consider if there are any other recreation hubs that should be developed. And so the plan, you'll see, takes that on board. In terms of the goals, accessibility, obviously the reason you're in the business of doing this in terms of taxpayers' money is that there are evident health and wellness and active living benefits that come through it. Fiscal sustainability will be a guiding principle by which you implement some of the recommendations of the plan, and also partnership with a variety of organizations to try and achieve that. So, getting into the details, we're going to do this just by assets, so looking at indoor recreation first, cultural facilities, outdoor facilities, and then Parkland as well. I'm getting to the age where I need reading glasses, so I apologize. In terms of the arenas, the issue that the way we analyze it is we look at it from a perspective of a number of issues. What is the current utilization of these facilities? So how are they being used? Because you do hear routinely that there is a need for more ice by groups, and some of that is evident, and it's also about the time of day that they get access and so on. But we need to stand back and ask, do you have enough of what you're providing? The second one then is, what do standards in the GTA and elsewhere tell us about what you should be providing by way of the level of these facilities? The third aspect is the consultation, allowing people to come out and say what they think about these facilities, which they use, and are they satisfied, and what would they like to see change. We ask that of individuals, so people that just lace up, parents that put their children on the ice, as well as user groups that have a responsibility to provide that service to a number of groups. And then lastly, the condition of the facilities, and that's probably the most important thing. This plan, if it's nothing else, it's an asset management plan for recreation, so you have to look at it through that lens as well. So in terms of the standards are currently good, and you have one pad per essentially 8,500, which for a urban/rural community is good. In terms of, but it's important to recognize that the whole use of ice is regional in nature. The big issue on the table, though, when you look through all of the utilization, when you look through all of the data on condition, is Blackstock Arena. And Blackstock Arena is a decision that has to be addressed in the context of this plan. So we've provided a range of information which will lead to appropriate choices, and I think it's important that we ask council through processes like this, but then the public as well. And then when we hear all of this, we'll give you our recommendation, our final recommendation on it, recognizing that that there may be a need for further discussion with the community once there are some specifics in place as to how you would go about reinvesting in the supply of ice. So there are a number of options. So Blackstock, without getting into details on it, and without any sentimentality, and I guess I have the advantage of not being someone that's used the facility, although I can fully appreciate the desire to recognize the community legacy of these facilities. But just to be very hard-nosed about it, it's an undersized facility. It is in need of a lot of capital maintenance and costs, which will lead to a pretty clear conclusion in our mind that the facility itself is not one that you would reinvest in. So putting another $4.5 million into that particular facility, if you were building a one-pad standard ice pad, which again is something which you may or may not do depending on circumstances, you're in the order of sort of 12 to 15 million most likely. So to put $4 million in plus is not a cost that I think you would want to bear for this. It's not going to improve the functionality, it's just going to maintain it, and that's an important consideration. So one of our recommendations certainly is that the Blackstock Arena needs to be decommissioned. But, we don't put a period there and say that's the recommendation for Blackstock. It's important that we're providing an improvement in value, a better value proposition for residents across the municipality, but certainly residents who are in those user groups and others that use Blackstock. So what are we proposing that could change? Well, you have to look at it from the lens of, well, a number of things. One is community access, fairness, equity, and these principles are in the plan. If you do that, I think it would lead you quite fairly to say that maybe you don't put all of your facilities in Port Perry, because you have a requirement to service the eastern areas, and so a secondary hub. And we're certainly of the mindset that Blackstock could become, with investment, I don't think it is now, but it could become, with investment, a secondary hub within the municipality. So there is some geographic distribution of the services. In terms of the options, though, with the decommissioning, you need to replace something. So where do you replace that ice? And I should just say that the conclusion of our work is that right now, as of today, you don't need net additional ice, but you need to maintain the ice you have. So that substandard facility, it's not regulation size, would be replaced. It would be replaced presumably with an LH size, regulation size, modern arena facility. So what are the options to doing that? Well, they're laid out there. There's the centralized approach, which would see the third pad being added to the existing Scugog Community Recreation Center. We can't say, yes, it's absolutely doable until you actually do the various studies that would tell you whether there are any complications with that. But based on our review and seeing the size of the site, its current condition, where the ice plant is, all of these good things, it's something that is doable. Excuse me. The second option is to decommission Blackstock Arena and construct a new single pad facility at the same site as well. Now, in looking at capital costs and operating costs, in terms of there are some recommendations coming out of this plan. You've got the potential to essentially add a facility to a larger complex, so you are going to generate likely, I say likely because we shouldn't be held to this until you actually get out and actually see the realities of this, but likely a lower capital cost, likely very likely a lower operating cost in the sense of you don't need to staff. You will need additional staff, but there are certain existing functions that you have that you can gain some efficiencies. So the fact that you have, effectively box office, you have administration and other services on the site, there will be some operating savings. Compared to if you built new Blackstock, you would need, if you're going to put in that kind of investment for a new facility, you're going to put people in there, and you're going to run it in a way where it's very much open for business all the time. So with that, in that regard, our view, we're linking other recommendations of the plan, one of which is that the town, I think, is in need, fair to say, with the exception of the need to address Blackstock's condition as a fundamental aspect of the plan, the next sort of fundamental piece is having some multi-use space. So a gymnasium, as an example, a double gym in town, and or a field house, which looks and feels like a gymnasium as well, that the opportunity would be to place that on the Blackstock site as well. So you wouldn't just have a single pad arena. The general principle is you don't repeat what we did 30, 40, 50 years ago and put single purpose facilities, but try and get some co-location. So if that were an option, to put a gymnasium there on the site, then you are very much into the philosophy of building that second recreation hub to serve the township of Scugog. And so that is one set of options. The other thing I just want to bring to your attention is, Scugog is growing, and it will, at the end of the plan period, there may well be a question based on standards as to whether or not you could justify a net additional ice surface, so going to that fourth ice surface. If it doesn't happen at the end of the plan, it might happen shortly thereafter based on growth. So in thinking long-term, that does tend to favor the continued interest in maybe doing something at Blackstock rather than centralizing here. And the reason it does that is if you did that, you solve the immediate problem by putting a third rink in Port Perry. But if you then need a fourth rink at some point in the relatively near future, next sort of 10, 12 years, you then have created that same problem of what do you do? We've got to find a home for our single pad. So a more expensive option, but one that has perhaps a bit more long-term vision to it, would be to develop that single pad at Blackstock, knowing that if you were to develop a second pad, that's where it would go. So you would have two hubs of two twin rinks as well. it's a lot to deal with, it's a lot to communicate to the public, but that is the conversation we will have, and we will get some preferences on that. One of the things that you as councillors with fiduciary responsibility need to take on board is what's the economics of all of this. So one of the things, the master plans can only go to a certain level, but one of the first things that need to do is just to really add up what those relative differences are. Because, you know, if you are required to spend one more dollar than perhaps you need to, you would spend that dollar if you felt there was a value associated with it that made it worthwhile. So we have to give you, I think, the relative capital costs of building here in Port Perry versus Blackstock, and what the operating impacts would be from building in each location. And as I said, you know, even with the master plan consultation, we do not use a recommendation, decommission something, period. It's decommission contingent on. So there has to be a decision as to what you will replace before any decision to decommission and potentially demolish a facility is taken. So continued community consultation. We are currently as a separate exercise, undertaking some site fit analysis of what can and cannot reasonably fit on the Blackstock site. Moving on to gymnasiums, I'm going to focus less on the narrative and just more on the strategies here. You know, there was an option to repurpose the existing community center hall. You know, it's possible, but it's not a state-of-the-art space that provides a long-term solution. So we're taking the view that long-term solutions with best practice is probably the best way to go. So the second option, which is preferred, is a multi-purpose gymnasium or field house space to accommodate a range of users. When you say field house, that would not mean it's being given over to indoor soccer and putting field turf down on the surface. It would be a multi-sport floor so that you could use it for a range of things and a range of programming that the municipality may wish as well. Again, the location options, I should just say the SCRC option, it's not necessarily preferred. It is an option which exists if you were to put the arena, the replacement arena back at Blackstock. But it is also possible, as I mentioned, that you can create some co-location advantages for Blackstock by placing the facility there. But again, the gymnasium is one of those capital items that we think is very important for the municipality going forward, and we call it gymnasium/field house. Just moving on to the issue of indoor pools. There's a lot of information on this slide, and I'll just focus on some of the more important highlights of it. But we had a lot of survey response on this, and it's evident that, you know, as it says there, almost 80% of respondents indicated the township requires additional indoor rec facilities, and the responses were almost exclusively an indoor pool, as well as gymnasium, fitness, walking track. Things like walking tracks can always be fitted. In terms of which pools do people use, it's a no surprise that the two facilities, Legends and the Ux Pool, garnered the most response in terms of facilities that you use. But the bottom line is that Scugog doesn't have an indoor pool, and the population or the residents are, and we'll find out in January when we take these responses back to people, with a certain driving radius in mind, are generally finding places where they can swim. So the status quo position would be the market, despite the desire of people to have an indoor pool, there are, you know, the indoor pool requirements of people are being met in the surrounding communities. That's just the basic information on how it works as a regional supply. So the reason we are, you know, we could certainly be considered to be hesitant about our recommendations here, and we're not really. It's just that there are options that council's aware of, and we need to work through some of those issues before we finally provide recommendations. But the place for, and you can't see it very clearly, but the place for a new pool is most definitely, if it's a municipal pool, the best location is currently at the SCRC. And there is a very faint outline that you might be able to see on your screens, almost like it's a whisper or an apology, but it is the site, the footprint is there, where you could add a municipal scale facility. We'll create these plans in a bit more clarity for you as part of the reporting. Obviously, if that were to happen, the idea of then adding ice there becomes, you know, a little bit more tenuous, I think, in terms of putting all of your eggs in one basket, as well as just the functioning of the site as a whole. The other aspect, so based on what we've heard and what we know about the priorities, or what we think are the priorities based on what we've heard, we're suggesting that the pool is one that should represent a long-term aspiration for the township to create a municipal standard pool. There are other options on the agenda. They're not municipal standard pools. So the question is, what would you be getting for that cost that you put in, both capital and operating? Those questions are being answered currently, and we'll come back to council with an update in the very near future. But I also wanted to, I'm going to just come back to some other delivery mechanisms in a moment. I'm not sure why it's, oh, maybe it didn't get in there. Okay, we had some analysis which was to give you an idea of what the capital costs were for pools in terms of municipal facilities. And one example that we're currently working on in the city of Timmins is for a standard sort of 6-lane municipal pool with a warm pool addition to it, and then in the future potential twinning of a facility as well. In terms of the pool itself, so at a municipal level, municipal pools can be very large, or they can be much more sort of functional and based on, here's your tank, here's what you have, and we're not going to have much bells and whistles around it. So that really does affect the cost. So you don't have to spend an enormous amount. But the numbers that we were playing with in Timmins from cost consultants, and Timmins is a little bit more costly to develop than Southern Ontario, obviously, was in the order around $500 a square foot. That basically means for a facility in Timmins, it was 50,000 square feet. That was about $27 million to build. As I said, that's a fairly muscular facility. You don't have to build to that scale, but the cost per square foot is what it is. In terms of, so if you were to build a facility that was at a non-municipal scale, the actual capital costs associated with it in per square foot terms are not necessarily going to be tremendously different. Operating costs, municipal facilities tend to be more expensive. Facilities that are operated by the private sector as ancillary services to other land uses, residential, hotels, etc., those operating costs might be less, but it all depends on the scale of the facility. So one of the things that we will be sort of just drilling down and talking to the public about is the desire for the particular elements of a pool. That's going to be a very relevant question to place as well. So that's where we are at current on the indoor pools. In terms of how they can be developed, we were requested, and we were very happy to do that, to recognize that it doesn't always have to be a case that the municipality is the organization that takes the risk on mainly it is for capital, but it doesn't have to be. Certainly there are operating models for sharing operating costs. We've got them here in a little bit of detail. All of them have the opportunity. None of them fully absolve the municipality from sharing in the risk. That's the main point. So Clarence Rockland is a good example. That's the city just outside of Ottawa, where the YMCA does take the full operating cost liability, with some help from the municipality for the first 5 or 6 years, after which they really stand on their own, and any surpluses that do occur, the city partakes in it. And there are other models around Some are effectively concessions that allow or joint ventures, which allow the assets to then revert to one or other of the parties. So that's one of the other things that we will look at in a little bit more detail. Moving on to community halls. The strategy generally for community halls is that we want to move away from the idea of standalone facilities where possible, so co-location as a principle. It's really a holding pattern here in that we should monitor use and the viability of those standalone community halls. Nothing done dramatically to change in the immediate term. And generally speaking, in those rural areas, it's very important to maintain the opportunity for recreation, and so an investigation of future viability, which really is the ability of those communities to provide additional programming. As it relates to the Latcham Centre, the strategy is, there is an opportunity. We recognize that the waterfront is something that's currently changing. We want to make sure they get the highest and best uses there. The opportunity is to as a long-term provision, to maybe relocate it with the lawn bowling club, but I think that is a long-term opportunity given the other priorities of the plan. Cultural facilities, fairly self-explanatory: consolidation at Town Hall and Museum Village, repurposing the Heritage Centre for youth space and for program space, and also I think the most important aspect of this is enhancing the presence on the waterfront, and so trying to get the mix of uses on the waterfront that fully recognise the cultural asset that it is. Ball diamonds. Our view is that if you look at the standards, I won't go into the details, but the standards of provision, not necessarily the quality of provision, but the standards of provision are good. We don't take the view at present that, and I know has been a concern with the compatibility of those ball diamonds on the waterfront, but we don't take the view that they should simply be relocated elsewhere. They're obviously very popular. The downtown merchants would agree with that as well. What we are saying, though, is that there may be some opportunities for gradual change over time, and I don't think we're bunting the issue down. We recognise that, firstly, with the other priorities of the plan, decommissioning fields and spending the money to rebuild them somewhere else probably is not high on the agenda. But long term, as the waterfront plan unfolds in full, there may be an opportunity to reconsider at least one of those fields, but it's not a priority at this point. In terms of soccer, it's very much a monitoring position. In terms of the standards are good, the provision is good. As always, in growing communities with growing interest in sports like soccer, keeping up with the neighbours, recognizing that you can have a good impact on the quality of life and the attractiveness of the community by making sure that you are on the cutting edge of trends. That means that we should maintain an interest in seeing how soccer is A, organized, and B, delivered, and whether that includes improving the capacity and putting in field turf, additional lighting. All of this stuff is relevant as well. Parkland. Focus on the top level there. Although the township is surrounded and obviously has a great deal of natural environment within which everyone can live and enjoy and recreate. If you look at the standards, the target level of provision, by which we mean sort of the comparable level of provision for both township and community parks, so the larger parks as well as the smaller neighborhood and parkettes, there is a need. The current level of provision based on our mapping puts you below what would be a comparable standard. That doesn't mean you need to go out and suddenly start creating parks, but it means that Parks and Rec planning, as you're dealing with developers and so forth, there needs to be a strategy of opportunity to make sure that ultimately, whether it's through cash in lieu or through dedications, that there is an enhancement to the level of provision. As we say here, probably for larger neighborhood or community parks rather than smaller parkettes. So the next steps, as I mentioned, are to communicate again with the public and get good input, particularly on those larger ticket items, continue to draft the plan, and then come back to council and the public with a draft plan, and for council's benefit, I think some understanding of some of the capital that would be associated with these recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that.
Thank you very much for the report. Mr. Belfry, was there anything that you wanted to add before I go to questions? Good. I know that the report that we have later on the agenda was authored by yourself. So at this time, just questions for the presentation from council. Started off with Councillor Kett.
Just quickly, I'd like to ask you, before we decided to, or before you decided to even propose the diamonds moving on the lakefront, would we do an economic study as well? Like you mentioned the local merchants, because I know that is major for them. On the other hand, we're looking at ball diamonds that are not always used a lot. So I understand both sides, but I'd really think that before we even take a step, we should do some kind of an impact, an economic for the local business.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. We obviously missed the boat this season to do that. The only way to do that is to, and it could very well be done, is to come down and just through the course of the season, just do what you need to do to survey the users and look at tournaments and try and have it as a normal year as opposed to over programming because we know there's a study going on. But I think the principle is that there is a connection. It does animate downtown. Great under the lights in an evening in June, and if it's great weather, it's what the waterfront should be used for. At the same time, you have to ask, what is the impact? So you could do that. I just think as the plans for the waterfront generally evolve, either the issue will become more pressing, or it won't. And in terms of the suitability of the land use, I think we can all recognize that it's not what you put on the waterfront necessarily, but it happens in a lot of places. And I just know from looking at the other items, spending money on relocations, when you could be spending money on something else, it may not be the highest priority.
Thank you.
Just before we go any further, I wanted to just identify pecuniary interest, which is later on in the agenda in the reports, item 2.3.1.2, indoor facilities, indoor pool. There's a reference there of developer proposed pool, and as in the past, I've identified that as pecuniary interest since I live across the street from that development. So if there's going to be any discussion about that, or when we get to that report, or if there's anything in this public or in this report consultation, then I'll relieve myself from the chair. So if you're going to ask questions about that or anything, then just let me know beforehand. Councillor Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to ask that kind of a question. Everybody knows how I feel about a pool. I just wondered if we could have a copy of your slide deck. You've got some very valuable information on that, and I'd like to have have it on hand to before the public meeting, so that I can answer some questions too. Yes, please. Thank you.
I just heard that an intention there to put it on the website as well for the public to see. Yeah.
I'll distribute it to council.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Watt?
Thank you. And further to that, just curious, is there only one public meeting being held in January, or will you hit a few of the outlying areas?
Sure.
There's one planned at the moment. I mean, I think we have to be, if what we provide creates a level of debate that requires another meeting, I think, we're certainly prepared to continue the conversation, but we are, going to need to come back to council with a draft at some point that you can vote on.
I just meant the same information at more than one location.
I'm not sure, it's just one location at the moment, I think.
At the moment, there's...
I'm open to,
If we get a great turnout, then we'll take a look at it, so. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Next questions from council? Councilor Somerville?
My question is just, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned at the very beginning that you had 300 replies back from your survey. Were they all positive replies, or were some negative, or did they feel that this was a little over budget for us at this present time?
Well, we didn't give any recommendations. We weren't saying we are contemplating X, Y, or Z. So it wasn't that kind of survey. So they didn't have to respond to that. And I'd have to look at the details, but generally speaking, when you do these kinds of surveys, you generally get people that use the facilities, and they're generally pretty fair about what's good and what's not so good. So the tone of the responses is always usually pretty good, and you can see, the usual bar chart, 60% satisfied, and then you really are focusing on the relative differences in terms of some of the dissatisfaction by facilities, and trying to sort of then link that to what we know about the condition of those facilities and what people tell us in consultation. So, no, I don't think there was a tone of any malcontent in any way. I think generally these things are always pretty positive, but there are, and we'd be happy, and it's in the background report, there's a lot of drill down you can get from these. So when we do speak to the public, it'll be the first time we've spoken to them since having that survey completed. So we'll have our antenna up to understanding what the issues are, and I think we'll be able to report back to you with a bit more clarity on that.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm very much a citizen of this community for many, many, many generations. I think it goes back 6 generations, and I know a lot of people in this community. And when you start playing with things that their ancestors put together, then you have a little rebellion. Not little. It gets a little. It could get very, very, very bad. But I just, I think your plan is very ambitious, and I like it. And I really do hope that we can go forward with it. My only major concern is the community halls, because we do have some community halls out in the community, and I think that that's a real sort of a touching point with a lot of community residents. Like, don't take our community hall away from us. That's what keeps our communities together. And once you start taking schools and churches away from a community, and then you start taking the community hall away, you have no community left. And it just tends to fall in that direction, and that's exactly how a lot of the communities have fallen. And Epsom, for example, is one, because they've now taken the school away. The community and the church will be soon going too. Nobody knows who their next door neighbor is, and the community hall at Utica is what actually keeps that little community together as a lovely little community.
And we'll take those comments on board, because there is a little bit of dichotomy in what we're saying. On the one hand, you don't want standalone community halls. On the other hand, we want to protect a level of service in the rural hamlets in particular. So, but we need to have them programmed. We need those spaces to be good and functional, which might cost some money. So we'll take that view on board, and we'll certainly put that to the public as well, and see if we can come up with a plan which assures at least that the level of service is maintained, so that you don't lose that connectedness.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council? All right, I just have a couple quick ones here. In your slide deck, you had rules of thumb for, I don't know if that's just general rules of thumb, or is that industry standards for the number of, for example, ball diamonds per population, or parks per hectare. Is there consideration to rural communities versus urban communities, such as, if there's that many residents, when you're talking about a ball diamond or a soccer field, but possibly in a rural township there's more participation in, say, outdoor sports versus, say, downtown Toronto, for example, or somewhere like that?
Well, it goes to that question, which is maintaining a level of service. So we want to make sure that this plan makes it very clear that that's a municipal-wide. You take all of the people in the municipality, you divide it by the number of ball fields, there's a standard. So it's a guideline only, and it tells us roughly, and then we have to look at participation. But to your question about what happens in rural areas, maintaining a level of service to us means that you do maintain ball diamonds, you do maintain green spaces, even though they may have a vastly superior standard, meaning they've got very few people using those fields. And that's just something, really speaking, you'll find you don't have to travel very far to see, some municipalities, particularly ones which came together through amalgamation. Each of the small communities each had an arena, and they may have had 2,000, 3,000 people, so they may have 9,000 people combined, but they have, 3 or 4 arenas, and so they have a tremendous standard. What you have to look at is the utilization. How well are these facilities being used?
But I mean the flip side of that, where in the rural areas where you would have less population that wouldn't maybe meet the criteria to have X amount of, say, ball diamonds, but the utilization rate is really high because that they don't have the other amenities or, the urban things to do. So
they do, but maybe one way to look at it is for ball diamonds, for ice arenas, certainly for pools, these are municipal-wide facilities. So you don't have to necessarily, so if you take Blackstock as an example, if there was a campus of activity developed there that serves the whole township, so the metric you would use would not necessarily just be Blackstock residents.
So, for example, making it a full-size arena in Blackstock the plan would be the extension of planning for hockey practice time, etc., would extend out to the Blackstock community where it's not maybe utilized for that now because of the size of the arena.
Yeah, it would be a not only municipal-wide, but the reality of it is that you build a new arena, people are going to come in from outside, they're going to join the groups, you're going to see that, just as ice is effectively traded to other places, and of course the North Durham minor hockey is amalgamated now anyway. These are essentially what I call citywide services, and the fact that they're located in a more rural area versus an urban area, it isn't necessarily the determining factor. Yeah.
So then just one final follow-up on that is there any consideration to greenbelt restrictions that's done on these reports? Because, referencing Blackstock, for example, and being a hub, I know you've talked about municipal or regional-wide draw on it, but if there was a thought of expanding development of residentials, we're kind of handcuffed and bound through the provincial policies in the Greenbelt and regional population growth forecast, so I don't know how much of that is taken into consideration for these analyses. Well,
the looking at a map where Blackstock, and I should just say, you currently are invested in an ice facility in Blackstock. So that's really why the focus is on Blackstock. If it weren't there and we made a philosophical decision, or you did, that you were going to have a secondary hub, so you're not putting all of the facilities in Port Perry, you could, in theory, put it somewhere else that might make sense. So that's why we're looking at Blackstock. Whatever goes in there serves the entire municipality. I'm not aware of, so in other words, the growth there versus Port Perry is not that relevant. The location obviously can serve the eastern areas as well, and Port Perry can serve some of the other wards that are there. I'm not aware of the Greenbelt. There's obviously not an issue of the Greenbelt on the site itself in Blackstock, but obviously in the surrounds.
Yeah, no, it's just looking at if there was, I didn't know if it was just a borders of the municipality study saying the number of population was referenced in the table there, or if there was population of the actual draw with the epicenter of that facility, and then not taken into consideration, or taken into consideration where future growth is planned to happen.
Well, we did look at it regionally. We don't try and get too clever, and we're not trying to draw drive time, isochrone maps or anything, but we certainly have looked at a range of different municipalities to look at the regional standard, and if you look at the regional standard, you've got more people per pad than you do just on the municipal standard, which just means you're serving your residents well. The problem is you have a facility which, as well liked as it is substandard and doesn't warrant taxpayer dollars to be reinvested in it when you could spend those same dollars building something new. And the question is, do you build it there or do you build it elsewhere?
Any other questions? All right. So I have moved by Councillor Drew that the presentation by Mr. Hack be received for information. Any questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Now we'll move into the reports, and I'm not sure if you're staying around for that report, Mr. Hack, or you...
Yes, I'll look at the agenda.
So the next up was is the 12.3 is the zoning bylaw amendment moved by Councillor Somerville, the recommended motion. Do we have a report at all following that, Ms. Knudsen, or are you just answering questions on the report?
I'm just here to answer any questions if necessary, Mr. Mayor.
Questions in council for Ms. Knudsen? For the property as identified on page 30 of our agendas, which is consolidate the zoning at 1270 Squealog Line 8. Okay, and no questions? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Very much. Now we're moving on to the report that Mr. Belfry is with the master plan strategic Parks and Rec and Culture Strategic Master Plan update. So we'll just, is there a high-level report you're planning on doing with that, or just answer questions, because a lot of it was touched on that was in the report?
Yeah, the report is just a mirror, essentially, like more of just a breakdown of the presentation you just had, so I think they just go hand in hand.
Questions, Councillor Drew?
I'm sorry, I should have asked this question during the presentation, but I just saw my note. On page 45, you're talking about pools. It's okay, I'm talking about the outdoor pool. What do you see as the future for Bird's Eye Pool?
Through the mayor to the councillor.
You getting any more birds?
Yeah, more birds, no.
They're not amortized yet.
The future of Bird's Eye Pool obviously hinges on the development of an indoor pool. Most communities of this size, a lot of them wouldn't have an outdoor pool. I know there is as we touched on, like sentimentality and those kind of things, and there is a connection to always the community having a pool down there for decades before Bird's Eye Pool and the old. But it would come down to financial. Like the pool now was built in 2001, so we know it'll get to a point where it would need considerable work. We know it's not accessible, so right now, so we know that we have an investment that would be required there. If you are going to an indoor pool, I would think you might be moving away from it, so I would, if that was developed, then you probably wouldn't be having an outdoor pool there anymore.
Any other questions for Mr. Belfry? Seeing none, so as the receipt for information motion was moved by Councillor Drew, all those in favor? Carried, thank you. Next up is report by Mr. Chief Burney. Questions? Is that, or was there any commenting that you wanted to highlight?
No, I don't believe so, Mr. Mayor. I think the report is pretty comprehensive, and again, this is an opportunity to save the municipality, I believe, some substantial money, if we can move exponentially.
Okay, questions from council. Councillor Drew?
Just one quick question. All of the components that you're suggesting, the 90 cylinders, the 4 cameras, were they all included in the budget? Or are you taking advantage of having $20,000 savings and getting it all in one crunch?
through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, when we came up with the figure of, for the capital budget, we looked at what we had, and what we felt we needed, and did our best guess, along with the quotes, and of course added 10%, so I believe the $345 that's in the capital amount would give us what we needed, irregardless of who we went to as a provider or a supplier, and again, just the opportunities before us right now to make this move.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. I just wondered if the cameras were considered in the budget.
They weren't initially considered in the budget. To be honest, I didn't realize all the manufacturers had that opportunity available to them. And as we were doing our review of our equipment and the age of some of our equipment, what have you, the cameras just became an option that perhaps we should be looking at. I mean, I could take the cameras or I could leave the cameras. I see a great benefit to them, and with the technology that's came as it has, the fact that you can put a camera on a breathing air device for a couple $1,000s versus the purchase of a new camera for $10,000, to me it's,
Absolutely.
it's good math.
I totally agree.
Yes.
And thank you very much for doing this work and saving us some money. Good work, thank you.
So I don't think I mentioned it. It was moved by Councillor Drew, the recommendation. Other questions from council? And just to highlight, as the report states, that the request here, 3 quotes were obtained, and there's a savings in the urgency of following along with the purchasing power of this. So I think it's great that this is helping ensure that our first line responders are safe. So thanks for making sure that there's a wholesome review, and I'm pretty sure we'll see support for this. Any other questions for council? None? All those in favor? Carried.
Thank you,
Very
Mr.
much.
Mayor.
We're at the end of our agenda here. We have correspondence, none. Closed session. Councilor Kett, you were wanting to move the adjournment? Okay, moved by, oh, sorry, that snuck in there. That wasn't on there a little bit earlier. Councilor Guido moved for the adjournment. All those in favor?